recap, I suppose. David and his 600 men went off to go to war with the Philistines against Israel. And the battle that ensued, Saul was killed and his sons were killed. Now David doesn't know any of this because he was rejected by the warlords of the Philistines, and he's sent to go back to Ziklag. In the beginning of chapter 30 says this: Now it happened, when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, that the Amalekites had invaded the south and Ziklag, and attacked Ziklag and burnt it with fire. The Amalekites, I think I've said this before, were the grandchildren of Esau, and yet they were enemies of Israel. They were of the line of Abraham. Amalek fought Israel in the desert of Rephaim. Amalek was judged by God, and the one that was going to perform that judgment was King Saul, but because of King Saul's disobedience, he lost his kingdom. Now David had fought these men, this tribe, and he's pushed them further back. He's crushed them. We'll come to that in a moment. So they were nomadic people, and yet they had towns and they had villages. So they were a mixture of the two types. Now this was that they burned Ziklag with fire. I might get that pronunciation wrong and call it Zigzag now and again. Please forgive me. Now, verse 2 is very interesting. And had taken captive the women and those who were there, from the small to the great. They did not kill anyone, but carried them away and went their way. So David and his men came to the city, and there it was, burned with fire, and their wives and their sons and their daughters had been taken captive. They've just done a 3 days journey. We sometimes forget that these men will probably be on foot, carrying a spear and a shield and a bag with stuff in it, but they also would have behind them cattle, and they would have herdsmen bringing on the cattle, because when they went to battle they had to be able to feed themselves and look after themselves. In any war you have a line of supplies behind you being brought up all the time. So we have this 600 men and their supplies. Now David and the men have got to Ziklag, and they've looked at it, and it's not there, it's burnt. But there's also something very strange about it, because there's no bodies. There's no bodies. They've gone there, and there's no bodies. It's just burnt. Now you would have thought, wouldn't you, that someone who's attacked it would kill the people in there and take them, but they haven't. And this whole story, this whole incident, is in the providence of God. How God moved and kept David and his wives and his men and their wives and children safe. Sounds strange, doesn't it, that they were captured. All the cattle that was there was taken and gone. So this army, this band of warriors, are herding cattle as well as people that they are to enslave. So David and his men, verse 3, came to the city, and there it was burned with fire, and their wives and their sons and their daughters had been taken captive. And David and the people who were with him lifted up their voices and wept until they had no more power to weep. The sorrow, the desolation that they saw caused them such emotion that they wept until they could weep no more. An experience that we probably will never know. And David's two wives, Hanimon, the Jezreelite, and Abigail, the widow of Nabal, the Carmelite, had been taken captive. Now David was greatly distressed. Now why? We're told. The people spoke of stoning him because of the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and his daughters. You've got this picture that these men had travelled 3 days to get back to Ziklag, and they were there, and it was desolate, empty, no bodies, no nothing, no cattle, not even the corpse of the cattle, the sheep. Everything was taken, whipped away, and they were devastated. And the people, his soldiers, who can we take it out on? We always take it out on our leaders. So David was greatly disturbed because the people wanted to stone him. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. David had finally come to his senses. God, in his providence, has brought David to this point where he now seeks the Lord. We're not told his prayer, we're not told how he spoke, but he came to the Lord and strengthened himself in God. Then David said to Abiathar, the priest, Ahimelech's son, please bring the ephod here to me. And Abiathar brought the ephod to David. So David inquired of the Lord. Now, this was a dress piece, and the priest is holding it, and David has come near. He's come near to something which he is saying is holy. He's come near, and he's come near to the Lord. He strengthened himself in the Lord through his prayers and through coming back in faith, and he's called the priest the right way round, and the effort of God that's there. So David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I pursue this troop? Shall I overtake them? And he answered him, pursue, for you shall surely overtake them, and without fail recover all. David got an instant answer to his prayers. Go, pursue them, and you will recover all. Such strength, such great encouragement. Just in the chapter before, you had Saul inquiring of the Lord, and the Lord turned his back on Saul. And Saul went to desperate measures. He called up Samuel from the grave to hear the things he didn't want to hear. David has gone to the Lord. David has spoken to the Lord, and the Lord has answered him. You will recover all. So David went, and his 600 men who were with him. Again, we must try and keep the picture. They're on foot mainly. They've got cattle with them, not a lot, just enough to go to war with. And now they're going to leave this burnt, derelict place, and they're going to pursue the Amalekites. Now they came to the brook Bezor, where those stayed who had left, were left behind. The Bezor was a brook, and from what I can gather of this brook, it was fed by small rivers. So I'm told by theologians that know a lot more than me that in this season it was getting slightly flooded. So it's becoming harder to cross, harder to herd cattle across. And David is in a hurry. So he leaves 200 of his weakest soldiers, soldiers that need respite. David pursued, he and the 400 men. 200 stayed behind, who were so weary that they could not cross the brook easily. You come to this place, you're leaving behind. What are they leaving behind? They're leaving behind their supplies and their cattle, so that they can move quicker. They've got food with them, as we'll find out. Then they found an Egyptian in the field and brought him to David, and they gave him bread, and he ate. And they gave him drink, water. They gave him a piece of cake of figs and 2 clusters of raisins. So when he had eaten, his strength came back to him. For he had eaten no bread, nor drunk water for 3 days and 3 nights. The providence of God again. There's someone that they've met. Someone who needs help, and they're helping him. And David said to him, "To whom do you belong? And where are you from?" And he said, "I am a young man from Egypt, servant of an Amalekite. And my master left me behind because 3 days ago I fell sick." God's working everything to put in place for when David comes along. 3 days ago when he was with the Philistines, this chap, this young Egyptian, was taken ill with a fever, and his caring master just left him in the desert and carried on with the plunder that they'd taken. Yes, he just left him there. I fell sick 3 days ago. We made an invasion of the south area of the Cherethites in the territory belonging to Judah and the southern area of Caleb. And we burned Ziklag with fire. And David said to him, "Can you take me down to this troop?" So he said, "Swear to me by God that you will neither kill me nor deliver me into the hand of my master, and I will take you down to this troop." Now he's got freedom, he's got refreshment, and he's met a totally different type of army and leader. They fed him, they haven't tortured him, they tell them what they want to know, they've encouraged him, they've strengthened him, they've given him food and water from their own supplies. Then when he had brought him down, there they were, spread out over all the land. Again, that's giving us a picture of the vastness of what they captured. Because they've been raiding, as we find in a minute, they've not just been raiding Judah, but they've raided the Philistines. And they've taken their cattle, they've taken their clothing, they've ransacked the place, and they've taken people. And all this has to be kept together. You know, we see pictures of refugees walking on the television, walking for miles. Well, this is similar, but even worse. And there they are. There's now this vast group. And I can imagine that you've got some looking after the cattle, and some enjoying themselves in the tents, going through the goodies that they've got, the gold and the silver and the jewellery that they've plundered. You've got another group looking after the captives, the slaves that they will be selling later on. Now David attacked them from twilight until the evening of the next day. Twilight, sun's going down. Quietly. David attacks. These people are drunk, and he's attacking them. He's slaughtering them. And he carried on all through the next day until the evening. There's not a man of them escaped, except 400 young men who rode on camels and fled. I would imagine that those 400 young men were the ones looking on the perimeter of this vast crowd, this vast array of people, and they were looking after the cattle. I would imagine that when they saw the commotion and the slaughter that's going on in the camp, they fled. They fled. And they've gone. So David recovered all that the Amalekites had carried away. And David rescued his 2 wives. And nothing of theirs was lacking, neither small nor great, sons nor daughters, spoil or anything which they had taken from them. David recovered all. The providence of God, David had come back to his understanding of God. He'd strengthened himself in the sight of God when his men were angry and frustrated and sad, that he'd come back to God and he strengthened himself. His attitude was not the same as the men. He called on God. He's got the priest, he's got the effort, and he's inquired of God. And God answered him, go, and you will recover all. And in those just few verses that we've read, God has kept his promise to David. David is still got some time to go before he becomes king. That's another 7 years, I think. He's still got time to come, but God is preparing him to be the man. And again, now this great crowd of cattle, slaves, captured people, armory, has all got to be loaded up onto trucks with horses pulling them, or donkeys or asses or goats, but not petrol trucks. It's all got to be loaded up and taken back. Now you can imagine this vast crowd. You've only got 400 soldiers, and you've got this vast crowd, and you've got people that have met their husbands again, their daughters and their sons, and I can imagine them all chipping in to herd the sheep, herd the cattle, and to turn us round and to go home, all loaded up, and off it goes. So David recovered all that the Amalekites had carried away, and David rescued his 2 wives, and nothing of theirs was lacking, neither small nor great. Now we read that the Amalekites had taken everything from Ziklag, small and great. Nothing had been missing. No one's died of fright. They've all been rescued, and they're all going back. David recovered it all. Then David took all the flocks and the herds they had driven before over the livestock, and said, this is David's spoil. Now when he married Caleb's wife, ex-wife and widow, he took on her flocks and her cattle. We know that Caleb was a very rich man, and here now David is even increasing his physical wealth. He is becoming a very rich man, and all the soldiers with him are becoming richer by following David. God, in his providence, is building up his people. He's building up David to be a ruler, and he's leading him on. Now David came to the 200 men who had been so weary that they could not follow David, whom they also had made to stay at the brook Zizor. So they went out to meet David and to meet the people who were with him. And when David came near the people, he greeted them. He greeted them. He's accepting them as part of the army. He's greeted them. They couldn't come with him They were left behind. But he greeted them. Then all the wicked and worthless men, you're always going to get those, aren't you? You're always going to get someone that's going to be too greedy. You know? I've done my bit. I'm going to keep what I've done. Keep what I've got. So all these wicked and worthless men, or those who went with David, answered and said, because they did not go with us, we will not give them any of the spoil. That's all. And then, you know, you didn't come, you were too weary to come. You was told to look after the wagons and stuff. So, you know, you're not worthy of getting any of the spoil. Because they did not go with us, we will not give them any of the spoil. Then he gave any of the spoil that we have recovered, except for every man's wife and children, that they may lead them away and depart. Now, I find that strange, you know. They wouldn't take another man's wife and his children, but they wouldn't give him back his property. They'll give him his wife and his children. They didn't want the responsibility. Now, this is a great change and a great attitude of David here. We're seeing the working of God through him. But David said, my brethren, you shall not do so with what the Lord has given us, who has preserved us and delivered into our hands the truth that came against us. Or who will heed you in this matter? No one's going to listen to you about this. But as his part is, who goes down to the battle, so shall his part be, who stays by the supplies. We have there the hint that they stayed by the supplies. They were there, they were doing a job. It might not have been in the fray, it might not have been in the battle, but what they were doing was important. Although they were weary to fight, they could still wait and care for the cattle and the supplies, which is what they did. They shall share alike. The attitude of the king, the attitude of the leader. These people that we had to leave behind, we care for them as much as those that were in the fray. You often get people that in churches, they always seem to be at the front doing things, and yet there's other people in the background praying, looking after children in the home, while the others can go out and do the work of the Lord. And can you imagine somebody saying, well, thousands have been saved, but it's been nothing to do with you, God, looking after my children. It's been nothing to do with you, so you're not really getting very much. You know, we might let you have a piece of cake later. But you could imagine, this is the same sort of attitude that these people have had. David has said, no, they're part of the family, they're part of the troop, they're part of the group, they're brethren. And we treat each other equally and civilly. Well, who will heed you in this matter? No one. So it was from that day forth that he made it a statute and an ordinance for Israel to this day, that anybody who's not in the fight but a part of the army would get their percentage, if you like, their wage. They would get what they're worth. Now when David came to Ziklag, he sent some of the spoil. Now the rest of the chapter is David giving back to people who had helped him in Judah. Giving a gift back. Don't forget, they've been raided by these Amalekites, and so they're in poverty. And so David is now giving it back. And quite a lot. Quite a lot of places. There's 7 specific areas that he gave it to, and the elders there. There's the cities of the Lemonites, cities of the Canaanites, and the Borum. And then there's another 4 places that he gave specifically to. And it says wonderfully at the bottom of the verse, of the chapter, those who were in Hebron, and to all the places where David himself and his men were accustomed to rove. So wherever he roamed with his group of 600 soldiers, and they just weren't 600 soldiers, they had wives, they had children, they had cattle. Everybody who cared for them in their time of need, he sent them presents. He sent them gifts. All in the providence of God. David's not perfect by any means. And even in his later life he proves again that he's human and he's not perfect. But he's a man after God's own heart. He can see his mistakes when the Lord prompts him and he comes back to the Lord. What would have happened if he'd have gone to battle with the Philistines against Saul and against Judah and Israel? Would he have been what they said? Would he have been at the back, attacking the Philistines from the rear? Would he have gone forward to be instrumental in the death of God's anointed King Saul? The Lord moved things around for David. We don't know what the future holds, but we know who holds the future. And it's having that faith and trust in our God that whatever befalls us, all things work together for good for them that trust him.